Thanks for listening to The Rebuild, a Seattle Seahawks podcast with me, Rob Staton. Today I've been speaking to Coach Jim Leavitt. He was the 49ers linebackers coach between 2011 and 2014, working with Vic Fangio. More recently, he's been working as a defensive coordinator in college football with Colorado, Oregon, Florida Atlantic, and SMU. If you ask him, he'll tell you that nobody knows the 3-4 better than he does. With the Seahawks bringing in coaches who have worked for Vic Fangio, and with the team shifting towards the 3-4, Coach Leavitt felt like the perfect person to talk about the types of players who fit the scheme.
The great thing about the 3-4 is it has answers. It has answers to all the different formations, the different sets, different things that an offense wants to do. And that's one of the reasons people went from the 4-3 to the 3-4 because of flexibility. And again, has answers.
I'd like to ask you about the defensive line. How integral or not is it to have a really good two-gapping nose tackle? Is it a position you pretty much, maybe you can plug somebody in, or is it an area of greater importance than that?
It's the great importance, in my opinion. I think it's the 3-4 starts for that nose. Now, he's only a first and second down player. He's not going to be on the field probably in a passing situation or a situation where, they're going to throw the ball, because he's probably not a real good pass rusher. But he's got to be a beast. He's got to be able to handle the center. He does have to be able to handle both A-gaps, even though the linebacker, the inside linebacker, is going to play off the nose. So if the nose got reached one way or the other, he would just play the backside A, and the backside inside linebacker would play the front side A. So, he's always going to make the nose right. The better the nose is, the more freedom those linebackers have. And that's one of the great things about the 3-4 is the ability for the inside linebackers to not get blocked and to be able to make plays from sideline to sideline. In the 3-4 defense, the people are going to make most of your tackles are going to be your inside linebackers and your safeties.
So how good do those linebackers need to be? If the scheme sets them up to make a lot of plays, if they're in a position to make a lot of plays, how important is it that you have two good linebackers there? And what are their duties? How does the role of a 3-4 inside linebacker differ from the standard, Mike, Will, Sam in a 4-3?
Well, first of all, in a 4-3, those three linebackers are going to get blocked more often. They'll have people up on them more. In a 3-4, you've got two defensive ends that are over the offensive tackles. You got your nose that's on the center, and here they just really deal with the guards most of the time, the offensive guards. Unless those tackles get reach in your DNs. Your DNs are very important too. They've got to be really good players. They've got to have some length. You'd like to have them some length. Most of them around 6'4", probably around 300 pounds. Got to be very strong, and then we got to be able to handle an offensive tackle. The inside linebackers have to be very good. They got to be able to run. They got to be able to anticipate. They got to be able to tackle well. They got to be able to get off blocks, from mostly the offensive guards. So those, they are very important. They don't have to be as big as people think. A lot of times people think the 3-4 inside linebackers have to be really big, but I had two of the best in the world at the 49ers with Pat Willis and Navarro Bowman. They weren't particularly that big. Navarro was probably about 6'1", probably about 242 pounds. Pat Willis was about 6'3", about 238 pounds. But they could run, they could make plays. They were great tacklers. They had strong hands. They anticipated well. They had a great nose for the ball, and they're very smart.
I want to ask you about the end position. What makes a good 3-4 end or a 5 technique then? What kind of a player do you look for? And you've touched on it a little bit there, but what are their key duties, would you say?
Well, they got to get their hands on the offensive tackle, so you want to have some length, or at least arm length. They've got to have good feet. They got to have good strength. Got to have good power. And to me, those are big keys. To play defensive end in the 3-4 is difficult. It's not very easy, because you're playing them a lot of times head up those offensive tackles, so they're in a position to be reached. But you can set those DNs up in a way that they can, by the formation of the back, where the back's located, they can sometimes play to whether the back's on their side or not. In other words, if the back was on their side, they can play inside a tad to the offensive tackle, because the stretch play is probably going to go away from them. if the back is away from them, they probably want to play more head up because the stretch play will probably go towards them. So they can line up a little bit by the back location, and that being a pretty good indicator. But those DNs got to be really good players. A lot of times I say that I want them to be about 6'4", 295 at least, be able to run, great feet, great strength, very important, and to be able to read those offensive tackles quickly. Because really, they don't really read the ball as much. You can peripher the ball a little bit, but usually they're going to read the hat or the body of the offensive tackle.
When you were in San Francisco, there was obviously Justin Smith there. 285 pounds. You mentioned length a couple of times. He had just over 32-inch arms. Does it show that if you've got a player as good as Smith, who's maybe got the intensity and the attitude and the physicality that he has, that you can make it work at that position, even if you maybe not got the ideal physical profile for that role? And how rare is a player like Smith to be able to fit into sort of that position when he hasn't got the ideals?
Well, Justin had pretty good length. He had great mentality. He was very tough, and he was very, very strong, and he ran well. He had very good feet. So maybe his arm length could have been a little bit more, but he had all the other attributes. So, and you're always going to have a person that doesn't fit the mold, but ends up being a great player just because they are. And Justin had great anticipation, great strength, could run well. He did have good length, very tough, very tough. And he was ideal for that position.
Final question about the defensive front. When you look at the draft that's upcoming now, there's a guy called Devonta Wyatt at Georgia. He's 6'3", he's 300 pounds, very quick, very strong. You'd probably describe him as a classic 3 technique if you were going to sort of put him into sort of a, tag a name to him. Geno Atkins type player. Can a player like that figure into a 3-4 defensive front?
I don't know. I mean, I've got to study a guy, and sometimes people might think he's a 3 technique, but that's not always true. He might be a great 4-eye or a 5. And, really in the odd front, you run quite a bit of 3 technique, depending on the formation. So that's also the great thing about the 3-4. As a DN, you're going to play the 3. You're going to play the 4-eye. You're going to play the 5. You're going to play all those spots. So you have to be flexible to be able to handle it and do it.
What do you look for in a classic 3-4 pass rushing outside linebacker?
Well, you got to be able to run, obviously. Your first step, your anticipation, your first step is very, very important. Your get off is really important because it's all about the pass rush. In the NFL, it's not so much 3-4. Sometimes it's more of a 5-2 because those outside linebackers almost play it like the old 4-3 DN. They just got to be able to pass drop enough to not hurt you. Obviously, the more they can pass drop, better off they are. But the key is, can they get to the quarterback? That's the big key. And how well are they at getting to the quarterback? How well their hands? How well is their quickness, their tenacity? They want to. Obviously, size is important here too. Length, the get off, those kind of things. Really, really important. Smart. I liked, we had Ahmad Brooks and we had Aldon Smith. And, those guys were really, really good. And, but the smarter they are, it helps because all the formations, the drops, the calls, all the different things you do, it really helps you.
Is there a preferred form of coverage in the 3-4 at the back end? What would, for example, Vic Fangio go with, for example? Is it a lot of man? And what type of cornerbacks play best within this scheme?
Well, you want corners, no matter what scheme, 4-3 or 3-4, you want corners that can cover man. They can get up there and press, and they can challenge receivers. They can't do that. It's tough. Sometimes playing zone goes a little bit harder. Sometimes with some people, you have a different, but we ran all the man and zone. We ran both, but they got to be able to run man. They got to be able to play man. You want arm length. Corners are critical. Corners are the key. Your safety's got to be great communicators, great tacklers, heady type ball players, got to be very smart. But those corners are the key. That's who you're going to draft the highest because they got to be able to go out there and lock up the very good receivers.
Why are they so key, Coach, then? Is it because they've got to be quick, they've got to be great athletes, they've got to be able to stick, especially in the modern NFL where you're playing some fantastic athletes at the wide receiver position?
Well, exactly. That's why. those receivers getting paid a lot of money. They're very, very good. You want to take them out of the equation. If you can take those receivers out of the equation, then it just helps the rest of the defense out. You can load up to other areas. If you can't handle the perimeter with your corners, then they'll just sit there and beat you all day long. You know, that's one of the key positions. You got to have corners. In this defense, and I would say in any of them, you better have corners or you're not going to be successful.
And how do the safeties play into all of this? You know, what are their key duties?
Well, like I said earlier, they got to be smart. They got to be great tacklers because they're going to make a lot of plays. They got to be heady ball players. They got to be able to anticipate. They got to be able to communicate extremely well to each other and to the defense. All those things are very important.
And Coach, final question. It does seem that Vic Fangio's scheme very popular at the moment in the league. We've just seen Ed Donatel become the new defensive coordinator in Minnesota. Brandon Staley's the coach in LA with the Chargers. Seattle's brought in some of Vic's former guys as well. Do you think this is a trend that will continue within the league? Do you think we will see more teams go with this? And do you think there's any reason for that? Short of the fact that it's just been very successful, obviously, for Vic Fangio when he's been in the NFL. But do you think it does anything to combat the modern style or the current trends within the league?
Well, you know, you got people that are very successful with the 4-3 defense. The thing I like about the 3-4 is, like I said, it's adaptable, it's flexible. And when you get in the passing situations, you can get into the even front. Just take the nose guard out, put another DB in or two DBs in, and then you've got a whole system, a sub package that you can run with the even front. So it's got great flexibility. You can do a lot of things. I believe he'll be around for quite a while.
A big thank you to Coach Jim Leavitt for his time. It did make me think about the importance of the cornerback position as he was talking about there. Seattle, traditionally under Pete Carroll, has been willing to find their guys later in the draft. The typical Carroll scheme allowed the Seahawks to find players of a certain size and profile that can play deep third of the defense, tackle, and play within the scheme which asked them not to be beaten over the top. In an article on Leavitt's arrival at Oregon, there was a discussion about his approach, stating the central idea is to limit the information a quarterback can glean pre-snap and force them to make reads and decisions on the fly. It went on to say all of the linebackers in Oregon's 2017 defense, even the inside ones, are closer in profile of a heavy-hitting defensive back than a bulky linebacker, prioritizing speed and quickness over size or strength. On most RPOs and play action, the interior seven would play the run, leaving the secondary to handle the pass options. This puts a lot of stress on the safeties and cornerbacks to hold up in coverage. It made me consider whether there's going to be a renewed focus on the corner position, and maybe this is why Seattle has invested as much as it has in the safety position. If they want to utilize something similar to Leavitt's scheme, and it's perfectly plausible they will do things differently, of course, acquiring a big-time cover corner might be necessary if they're going to put the same coverage stress on the position and keep the front seven mostly in the box. Sean Desai, when he was defensive coordinator in Chicago, had Jalen Johnson shadow Odell Beckham, Devontae Adams, and Mike Evans. It might be that the Seahawks seriously consider one of Sauce Gardner or Derek Stingley Jr. with the view that they can take on a similar role. Or alternatively, they'll continue to do things Carroll's way and target a cornerback who can be successful in this same kind of role, just not drafted in the top 10, but drafted in maybe round 3 or 4 or 5. It's worth noting a couple of other things. Desai liked to rush predominantly with a standard set and not blitz. The blitzing numbers reduced when he was defensive coordinator in Chicago. So pass rush is still of vital importance, because if you can't get home with 4, you won't create pressure. Leavitt was talking about how important it is that those guys can pass rush, and the Seahawks need to add to that position as we've been discussing over the weeks. So despite all of the cornerback talk, they do need game wreckers off the edge, or this won't work. Desai also ran a lot of 3 safety looks. The 2 previous coordinators, Fangio and Chuck Picano, lived with 2 linebackers on the field. When Desai took over, the second linebacker played 8% fewer snaps. It might mean if they draft a linebacker early, they go for a quick, dynamic, cover type who can almost do both the job of the third safety or a linebacker. Or they might just use a mix with Cody Barton or a rookie coming off the field so Ryan Neal or Marquise Blair can play more snaps. It's an interesting thought, though, as how much Seattle will adopt some of these 3-4 concepts that Fangio and his fellow coaches have used, and how this is going to impact the draft and the types of players they pick, whether things change with regards to how early they take cornerbacks, whether there's more importance on that position, and what they're going to do with some hefty draft stock in the first 3 rounds. I hope you enjoyed the interview and the discussion afterwards. For more of this, subscribe to the Rebuild podcast, now available on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Until next time, bye for now.